in China. Let me remind you that the EUSME Center is funded by the European Union and has among the implementing partners several chambers of commerce. We help European companies to access the Chinese market, giving advice in a variety of fields like legal, human resources, technical, and business development. And now, let me introduce the expert today, a long veteran in China, Mr. Gianluca Giara, which has tremendous expertise on environmental projects in China, and we have asked him to explain what the opportunities can be for the European Union SMEs in China, addressing the huge challenges that the Chinese market has regarding environment. You will see now several questions or polls appearing on your screens. We encourage you to help us answering the questions that you will see. And now, we don't wait more. I will pass the microphone to Gianluca, which will start the presentation. Thank you very much for your attendance.
So, first of all, thank you very much for the kind presentation. My name is Gianluca Chiara. Again, good afternoon or good morning, according to where you are listening. As it was said, today we will try to analyze the evolution within the Chinese environmental sector. And here in this slide, you can see the agenda of today's presentation. We will start with the introduction, where I will try to provide you the status of the Chinese economy and environmental sector. Then we will go through the market analysis, and I selected the 4 main sectors, as you can see, where basically I think there are major opportunities for European small-medium enterprise. Then we will see how to develop a successful business, because it's important when you develop your business in China to avoid important mistakes, and we will end with usual conclusion. So let's start with the introduction. We know that China, it's many years steadily the second most powerful economy in the world. Is recently the GDP growth of China declined a little bit, assessing around 7%, but is also expecting to raise again around 2018. As I was telling you before, somehow the Chinese economy is living a fundamental transition, and so this kind of decline was somehow planned from the Chinese central government. You can see I highlighted the main reason of this decline. First of all, Chinese central government is trying to control the expenditure from local government, provinces, and local municipalities. Then China is trying to have the transition that we had in Europe among 20 to 30 years ago. So it's trying to move from an energy-intensive economy to an energy-efficient one. Of course, the environmental protection represents the main part and the main reason of this transition, because, of course, Chinese people are requiring more and more a more clean environment, and they are more concerned about this issue. Of course, this implicates the intent of the central Chinese government to provide a better environment for long-term cooperation between Chinese and European companies for the introduction of high-quality technologies, and most of all, due to the ongoing reform of state-owned enterprise, finally the central government is starting to support Chinese, but not only Chinese, small-medium enterprise. Now, let's see the actual environmental status. Starting from 2008, China is the country that is investing the most in the introduction of environmental and renewable energy technologies. The problem is that we are facing now in China two unbalanced sector. What is very important to see is that, as I was telling you before, we are facing an ongoing development. So, of course, the Chinese government started to introduce a lot of laws and regulation that will be taking effect in the upcoming years. These laws and regulation, as I was telling you before, comes from the fact that the population is more and more concerned about the environment and consequently is giving a lot of pressure towards the central and local governments. Moreover, as this sector have been developing very quickly, they are unbalanced also because of the many stakeholders that have been involved: state-owned companies, state holding companies, local companies, small medium enterprise, environmental agencies, and so forth. As I was telling you, throughout the years, the Chinese central government is approving a lot of laws in order to make this sector much more balanced. And let's start to give a look to the market analysis and see what has been done and what is going to happen. So we can start from the water sector. As you can see, the State Council approved right this year the Action Plan on Water Prevention and Control. According to a report published from the Chinese Ministry of Environment, 60% of Chinese groundwater is unfit for human health consumption. Water sector represents probably the most stringent and serious problem for Chinese central government. So far, they have been pushing for the development of municipal wastewater treatment plant. Actually, in big cities, the ratio is pretty good, 80%, but if we go rural, it reaches only 65%. Moreover, what it's very important to say is that at least 50% of actual municipal wastewater treatment plants are running at loss because China has been focused on meeting the water demand so far by simply increasing the supply. Two elements need to be taken very much in account from companies and European small medium enterprise present on the market or that are thinking to enter into the market. The Chinese government is starting to give a lot of attention towards rural and industrial wastewater. These are two major sectors where a lot of public fund will be introduced and that could create a lot of business opportunities. Moreover, the National Development Reform Commission is promoting market-based mechanism to overall improve the sector development. But let's start to verify in which area and which technologies European small medium enterprise could introduce in Chinese market. In this slide, you can see I tried to summarize some of the opportunities, but again, these are examples that I provided based on my experience, but there can be many more. You have technology in the waters, you can have water saving technologies, water extraction, water distribution, water treatment. I made some example in terms of, for instance, a sealing product, a well drilling and high pressure pump, high efficiency pump, integrated monitoring system, membrane manufacturing technologies, sludge treatment technologies. As you can see, the list is endless. And in all these areas, there is the interest, of course, of Chinese companies in terms of cooperation with European companies. Another key sector is the renewable energy sector. Here you can see the latest legislative framework. The National Energy Administration approved an action plan on energy strategy development 2015-2020, and the State Council approved the document number 9 specifically on the orientation of the renewable energy sector introduction. We know very well that China set a very ambitious target. In fact, within 2020, China is expected to install 200 megawatt of wind, 100 megawatt of solar, and 30 megawatt of bioenergy. Also in this case, we are facing an, I would say, unbalanced sector, because we know very well, for instance, how Chinese companies are strong in the wind and in the solar sector, but it's also true that there are huge problems in terms of grid connection and expansion. Moreover, Chinese solar and wind plants are facing huge management and operational costs because of this rush in terms of development plant, a lot of times without using the proper technologies. I would say that if China is developing a large amount of wind and solar plant, it's facing some problem in order to reach the target of 30 megawatt of bioenergy technology. And this is the reason why, in particular, starting from next year, the Chinese central government is going to introduce a new fund in order to implement new plant, centralized biogas plant and decentralized biomass plant. What it's important to say is that the actual feed-in tariff system will be revised. You know that China has an ongoing study on the emission trading system, and this element has to be seen in a positive way. In fact, the intent of Chinese central government is in the future to reduce the actual feed-in tariff, in particular in the wind and in the solar sector. This is done with the intent to push the power plant to introduce the best available technology and so to be independent from a financial point of view. Here there are, as before, some technology suggestions that I propose to you of business opportunities that the European small-medium enterprise can take. China, for instance, is trying to introduce wind-to-heat technologies because, as you know, most of the wind plants are in the north, cold north, but the electricity actually is mostly used in the south industrialized part of China. There are opportunities in terms of specific equipments like inverter, converter, generator, gearboxes, pitch control, and so forth. In terms of solar sector, China is very keen to introduce effective solution for the management of distributed generation network, high quality solar rooftop solution, concentrated solar power, and thin films. Finally, in the bioenergy sector, I would say that the best opportunity are in terms of auxiliary equipment like a generator, condenser system, monitoring and control system, as well as specific steam turbines for biomass combustion.
Thank you, Gianluca. Very interesting, the water and the renewable energies. Before continuing, our support staff is going to launch some polls that we would much appreciate if you can answer that, because it will help us to understand better your needs. And now I pass again the speaker to Gianluca. Thank you, Gianluca.
This slide Um, Now I'm facing your reply about the question on I cannot read. Check. On the major challenges of EUSMEs facing approaching the Chinese green tech market, and I can see that the majority said that there are market legal constraints as 55%, financial constraint 29%, HR only 6%, and cultural difference 11%. I think is an interesting pool, and we will discuss more later about these results. So, going back to the presentation, now we are talking about the waste to energy and heating sector. You can see here the legislative framework set from the new environmental protection law and the State Council China Energy White Paper. In terms of market analysis, it's important to say that the Chinese Ministry of Housing and Rural Development is planning to increase the range of incinerator, waste to energy or heating plant at 100 year over year. So as you can see, the numbers are very huge. To give you a range of the production of municipal waste, Chinese on average produce 250 to 300 kilos per year. It's also true that so far the caloric value of Chinese municipal waste is pretty low, around 5 megajoule per kilo. But it's also true that specific measure will be in place to valorize the energy content from municipal solid waste. As you can see from the picture, China so far has been pushing only towards the development of landfill. So in many cases there is not even a clear understanding of how control and manage municipal solid waste, and this represents another opportunity for European small medium enterprise. And another opportunity is given from the fact, as I was telling you before, of the strong concern from local people in terms of development, in particular of waste to energy and incinerator. This means that the Chinese government will push even more in introducing best available technique. And also in this case, you can see some example about opportunities of technologies or equipment that can be introduced in terms, for instance, of equipment for sorting, washing mineral substances, combustion process technology, where, for instance, the waste is not sorted, in terms of boiler and gasifier, in terms of gasification process like anaerobic digestion, syngas solution, till solid waste disposal equipment manufacturing like landfill leakage proof geomembrane, hazardous waste treatment equipment, and so forth. The last sector I will take into account is the industrial pollution sector. As you can see, this year the Chinese Ministry of Environment approved a soil pollution and prevention action plan. The National People's Congress approved the air pollution prevention and control law. This is a very important area of opportunities for small medium enterprise that rarely has been discussed, in particular on Chinese or European media. For instance, from a survey of the Chinese Ministry of Environment, 20% of Chinese total arable land was badly contaminated from heavy metals, and this range reached over 40% if we talk about contaminated land. Now, for people not living in China, you have to take into account that the ratio of Chinese arable land is very low. It's one of the lowest all around the world. But here in China, there are 1.4 billion people that every day needs to eat safe food. So this represents a very critical data. Another critical data represent from air pollution control. Still, again, based on a survey done in 2014 from the Chinese Ministry of Environment, out of 161 monitored cities, only 16 reached the national standard of urban air quality. According to this data, it is foreseen that the sector will grow into a multi-trillion market between 2016 and 2020. Then we have to take into account, of course, how much China depends on industrial production. China is leading in many industrial sectors, and heavy industry accounts for 70% of its production. In most cases, the technology used is very basic and very polluting, and so the Chinese government is trying to upgrade these factories and through the introduction of a better technology. And as for the other sectors, you can see here listed many opportunities in terms of technology introduction. China is leading many industrial sectors in terms of iron and steel, aluminium, metals finishing, cement, tanning, glass, paper, and so forth. In all these sectors, there is the necessity to introduce better technology to control pollution in terms of air, water, and soil. And here you can see some examples, like in direct steel making process, a modified glass making furnace, environmental equipment like oil skim makers, VOC control technologies, and so forth. So, from this analysis, we have seen the actual situation of Chinese environmental, Chinese environment. We have seen China is facing a huge transition, both from the economic point of view, but also from an environmental point of view. And in this regard, we have to analyze, of course, the evolution. Chinese environmental sector is a sector that is evolving, and of course, according to the different sector, water, renewable, or industrial pollution control, the evolution is not constant and is not moving in the same way throughout all the sector. So based on this fact, of course, European small medium enterprise have to be very careful in order to understand how to develop an effective market approach. I can see now that has been launched the second pool about the problem that European companies are facing when they are present on the Chinese market. Somehow this pool goes to confirm what has been said before, because 78% of you confirm that the major problems are represented in terms of market and legal constraint, only 9% financial constraint, as well cultural differences. So let's go on and let's try, based also on the evidence of this pool, to try to understand which are the major problems that European small-medium enterprise can face while doing a business in China. First of all, of course, there is the problem of market access, because China, it's a very big country, very differentiated country. You have to think that in terms of China goes like from Portugal to over Russia, with more than 2 times population. Of course, doing business in big cities like Beijing or Shanghai, it's very different than developing a business in central west provinces of China. And of course, European small-medium enterprise can find sometimes a problem in order to understand how to adapt to all these different environments. Then, of course, there are financial barriers. China is becoming more and more expensive. The actual exchange rate between RMB and euro doesn't help, of course. And moreover, we have to say that only recently the Chinese government started to support small-medium enterprise. In terms of technology introduction, of course, China so far has been a cost-oriented market, because it makes pretty natural that the fact that the Chinese government, in order to develop very quickly their sector, they focus more on for the introduction of cheap technology. I said it before, but it's also a matter of Chinese companies that somehow they feel that their technology is not as good as the European one, and so they push to have a more cost-oriented market towards a quality market. But as I was telling you before, this kind of orientation is going to change. Then we have technical barrier. You have to take into account, as I was telling you before, that China is a very differentiated market. So, of course, you have, in many cases, there are big companies, in particular present in Beijing, Shanghai, Tianjin, or Shenzhen, that have a clear understanding of the technology that need to be introduced and how it works. But in many cases, you will face a reality where they have a problem to understand how this technology really works. Finally, as the pool said, there are also institutional barriers. You have to think that for each sector I mentioned, multiple ministers are involved. Only in the water sector, 7 ministers are involved. You can imagine how many local agencies. And moreover, there is, of course, very strong relationship between Chinese local government and enterprise. And sometimes, in many cases, I would say, European small-medium enterprise face a problem in order to, to fit within this environment. But it's also true that European small-medium enterprise have to try to avoid very simple mistake, because of course the Chinese market is difficult, but sometimes we make some mistakes to make it even more difficult. First of all, we have to understand how much our technical solution fit into the Chinese environmental market. In many cases, I've seen companies that, for instance, started to introduce their technology too early or too late. So it's very important to make a very careful legislative and market analysis of Chinese environment. Another important element to be taken into account is the preparation of the necessary documentation. Throughout my experience in China, I've seen too many times that European companies were coming with their usual, for instance, PPT presentation, company presentation, simply translated into Chinese. Chinese market is different. Chinese player required different information. So also in this case, the presentation of your technology, of your company needs to be localized. Another important element is the approach to the negotiation strategy. You have to take into account that Chinese are very fine negotiators. They are very patient. And unfortunately, European small medium enterprise not always have the time in order to sustain such long timing in negotiation. Moreover, as we said, China is very big, so you risk to be called to attend a lot of meetings, sometimes maybe far away from your headquarters. So you need to spend a lot of time and a lot of money, for instance, in flights. So in the moment you approach a negotiation, you have to keep in mind a timing and a price very strictly. Of course, this is very difficult because we are all under pressure. We all want to close a contract, but without a fixed strategy, you risk to lose a lot of time. Then you need to select the right people for your business. Again, HR resources are important in Europe like in China. So the important thing is to understand which kind of job need to be done and which kind of goal you want to achieve, and based on that, of course, select the right people. Also, this is a mistake that I've been facing a lot, done from many small medium enterprise. The matter of, for instance, hiring a junior engineer or manager, expecting that they can do everything from representing the company, developing the market, doing sales research, marketing research, it's not reasonable. That doesn't represent an opportunity of saving cost, is just a way of losing money. Of course, you have to develop a very effective budget control. What I can tell you is that in China, it's possible to develop a market without spending a lot of money. It's possible in the moment that the budget is very well studied and planned. Another important element I give you as a suggestion is to go beyond borders. China is a very big market, and I think that a European small medium enterprise should be more open to cooperate with each other, for instance, in sharing assets, sharing offices, sharing information. This could help a lot for the development of your business. Finally, you have to develop a very detailed market analysis in order to understand which kind of client, in which area, in which sector you want to approach. And this brings us to this slide. So how to understand which kind of approach we need to have. I summarized three main approaches. In case you open your own company, could be a WOFI. In case you cooperate through a joint venture with a Chinese company, or in case you develop a cooperation with a local foreigner engineering company. All these three approaches are correct and are wrong. It depends on how you want to develop your market. I give you some example. Of course, in case you have time and you have enough budget resource, and you want to strictly control your IP, I would suggest to open your own company. Take into account that, of course, you need the legal time to open your own office, to select the right people, to make the necessary market research, and so forth. In case you understand that, for instance, you have a technology, an equipment that is strongly required in China, and you receive a lot of interest from Chinese company, but on the other way around, you don't have a lot of time or a lot of resources to develop your own business, I would suggest to develop a joint venture with Chinese company. Also in this case, I can assure you that not all the Chinese companies in China are there just to steal your IP or your technologies. There are a lot of very serious and reliable Chinese companies that are eager to cooperate with you in terms of joint venture. This will help you to enter into the market in an easier way because, of course, Chinese companies already have their connections, and in terms of saving cost because, of course, all the logistics are covered from Chinese company. The third approach, I would say, is something in between the first and the second. So it means to create cooperation with local foreign engineering consulting companies. This will allow you to save time and money because you don't have to create your own office, and of course local companies have experience and a better access to local information. Of course, you don't have total control on your IP because the matter here is to create, of course, a trustworthy relationship with your engineering company. So, after this long talk, let's try to arrive to the usual conclusion. As we have seen, Chinese economy is living a fundamental transition. And we have seen also how Chinese environment is under stress and how national regulation, how many national regulations have been approved to sustain this market. This element can be seen, for instance, also from the many Chinese companies that are coming to Europe looking for stable cooperation with European companies in terms of course, joining forces in companies or in terms of technologies transition. Of course, China needs to start to introduce best available technique in multiple sectors, and I gave you some examples. In many cases, I would say that the whole environmental sector is not mature yet. In many cases, rules are not clear yet. The market has to be more open. There is a lack of experience from local governments. Said this, I'm convinced that European SMEs can play a fundamental role in terms of supporting the sustainable development of Chinese environmental and energy sector. Chinese market is very competitive, it's true, but I would give you one suggestion. Don't listen to the people that tells you that Chinese market is too difficult for European small medium enterprises. Not true. Like, honestly, it's not true even the suggestion of people that tell you that here everything is easy and you can sign a contract immediately. What I can tell you is that the Chinese market can be approached doing the right investment and the right marketing analysis. I will finish with one example. Today is the perfect day for this webinar. In Beijing, we are facing a lot of air pollution. The level of PM 2.5 is over 600, when in Europe, when it's 60, it's pretty high. I can assure you one point. China will not continue to allow these trends in terms of pollution. So China will change as Europe has been changing in the last 30 years. It's a matter to understand for us how much we want to be part of this change and so to develop a business opportunity in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gianluca. There are a number of questions surrounding the same topic, and I will try to summarize in two. One is, what is, in your opinion, the opportunities for environmental risks measurement and reporting?
Well, thanks for the question. Well, it depends the kind of companies presented this question, honestly. I would say that on this regard, we are facing a sensitive area because, of course, you know very well that in China it's difficult, in particular for foreigners, to get the real data and analyze data. Even us that we have been living and working here for so many years, we always refer on official data that are published from the central government, but we are not allowed to verify if these data are correct. On this regard, there are several European programs that are trying, let's say, to cooperate with Chinese ministers in order to support them to be more open. And things are changing. To give you an example, for instance, in terms of air pollution control, here in Beijing, the Beijing Environmental Protection Bureau created a specific website where we can see online real air pollution data. I would say that for specific technology or IT solution, on this regard, it's easier if you start to dialogue or cooperate with a public agency, public research company, not so much with private companies.
You are partly responded some of the questions from companies offering to the market environmental services. And particularly, we have repeated the question if there is an opportunity for using European Union methodologies auditing emissions.
Chinese are very open in learning more about European methodologies, of course, but this brings us on a different area of business. It's more a cooperation between, I would say, universities and research centers. For companies involved in this area, I would say that there are areas of opportunities, but I don't see in this moment a lot of, I wouldn't say that this is the area where I think the market is ready yet.
Okay, thank you, Gianluca. This is loud and clear. And this is a question I have. It is coming very soon, the 13-year plan, which is the 5-year plan, the 13 plan for the quinquennial plan of the Chinese government. Gianluca, do you expect environment issues to be taken seriously at this next 5-year plan?
Okay, this is another important element. Of course, we are all expecting the publication of the next 5-year plan. We are all very, with a lot of hope, I would say, but also very careful. Because honestly speaking, even in the past, we were expecting a lot of changes, but honestly, sometimes the expectation didn't follow what was really done. it seems that in this case something different will happen. At the highest level of the central government, I'm talking about the President Xi Jinping and the Prime Minister Li Keqiang, they put officially their face towards the development of a more sustainable and better environment in China. They repeat this topic and element in all their official speech in China and abroad. So one of the new five-year plan, honestly speaking, we think that we are going to have a lot of real changes for Chinese environment. And this is confirmed also from the fact that a lot of new national laws have been approved in 2015, and they didn't wait to approve them, waiting for the new five-year plan. This means that China is pushing a lot in terms of timing, and they don't want to waste any months in terms of a new environmental regulation. So I think this should be the right moment for China to really start to change its approach.
Okay, understood. This is a very repeated question. Some of the companies of the audience do not want to set up a company in China. What actually want is to find a partner to sell or distribute in China either the technology, the equipment, the software, or the services they have created. What would you recommend to these SMEs in Europe looking more for a partner rather than to set up the company in China?
Somehow I introduced that in the presentation. You have two major opportunities. You can create a joint venture with Chinese company, or you can start to cooperate with local foreign consulting engineering companies. These are the two opportunities mainly. Again, take into account that Chinese market requires a lot of time in order to be understood. In case you don't want, of course, to open your own office here in China, which makes sense, of course, I would suggest you, first of all, probably it's better to have a cooperation with foreign consulting companies, because they have a better understanding of the market, and moreover they have a better understanding of European culture, of course, and they can provide you the right assistance in maybe selecting the right Chinese companies and helping you, of course, throughout the whole negotiation. If you want to cut time, of course, as I was telling you before, there are a lot of Chinese companies present in China. There are a lot of Chinese companies coming to Europe that are interested in developing cooperation with European companies, transfer shares, for instance, technology transfer. You can take this element in account as well.
And last but not least, I think we have time to respond these questions. There are many good entrepreneurs in Europe, young people creating startups related with environment in general. And the question is, any chance to work with Chinese institutions and get funded? Because there's more money now in China than in Europe. So they're asking if they can get any funding for their projects.
This is a very interesting question, I would say. I think there are opportunities. Most of biggest Chinese state-owned companies or Chinese universities created their financial, I would say, company in charge to control specific funds which are meant to study and analyze good technologies present in Europe that could be introduced in China. So it's possible to get found. I think the big issue here is once you approach such a big finance company, how to protect yourself. Because maybe you are a great entrepreneur, but of course you are small, you are not strong. These people will come very well prepared, I can assure you, protected from the best legal advisor in Europe and in China. So you have to verify how and if, for instance, you want to keep, for instance, the trademark of your technology, or if you just want to sell it and so to get earning from your idea. There are opportunities, of course, but again, keep in mind that Chinese companies are very well prepared and they know very well Chinese as international market.
I'm not sure we have time for one more question. Let's see. Well, we don't have time because I have a huge list here. Anyhow, let me remind you that if you join the EUSME Center, you log in, you can do two things. One, download the webinar, and the presentation that is supporting the webinar, and use the function Ask the Expert, which will allow you to get responded whatever question you have on this topic. Before we finish, let me remind also that there is a Green Tech report, and well, the author of this report will be Mr. Gianluca Giara, which spoke today. So we will make sure any question from your side is handed out to Mr. Giara, and he will respond in time. Before finishing and saying thank you to you all, please, I encourage you to fill the evaluation form. That will help us to make better webinars in the future, to understand what didn't work, also what worked. And let me wish you a very nice day. Some of the attendees brought our attention some problems on the units in one of the slides. If such problem exists, it's not to blame the author, but we as editor, probably we made a mistake. We will make sure in the definite presentation that is corrected. Thank you very much. Have a very nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.